When you grow up in a house where dinner means one plate of food, Italian dinners can come as quite a shock, especially when the pasta you have just stuffed yourself with turns out to be only the beginning of dinner. It wasn't my first meal at my then Italian in laws in the south of Germany, but even by then, I still hadn't quite got used to this completely different eating culture. That evening, the spaghetti was served with a simple but delicious tomato and basil sauce and a generous amount of garlic. And to my surprise, I discovered that my stomach could stretch much more than I had ever expected. Of course, we had pasta at home too, but usually it was a tiny one floating in bone broth, which I absolutely hated, or a very typical Polish dish, pasta squares with cabbage and bacon. And that was always the whole meal. No salad afterwards, no coffee, and dessert. Not even a little shot of vodka as a digestive. I already knew that Rosaria, my then future and now ex mother in law, loved good food and even gave cooking classes at the local community college. But at that time, that was just a piece of information that didn't mean much to me. Back in 1995, the only vaguely Italian dish I had ever eaten was pizza, probably margherita or quattro formaggi. I still remember entering my in law's kitchen for the very first time, Rosaria's exclusive kingdom. It was a kind of controlled chaos where she somehow knew exactly where everything was, and nobody else was allowed to touch or move anything. There was one big fridge and a huge freezer, both packed with food. Parma ham, different kinds of salsiccia, countless cheeses that all sounded completely alien to me. Burrata, provolone, gorgonzola, as well as meat, seafood, and of course many bottles of her favorite white wine, Pinot Grigio. The worktop was covered with big bottles of olive oil, pots of basil, rosemary, and thyme, and a good number of Italian wines from different regions, from Puglia through Tuscany to Veneto. And then there was the pantry. You could probably live in that kitchen for months without buying anything and still put on weight. So there I was, stuffed like a turkey on Thanksgiving, wondering if I would even be able to get up from the table, when I suddenly heard the familiar voice calling from the kitchen. "The fish is ready. I need somebody to help me carry the plates." I almost choked. I looked at my then fiancé, my face clearly saying, "What does she mean? We have just finished eating." Before I even managed to say anything, the smell of butter and seafood drifted into the room. And then a perfectly fried salmon with sauteed vegetables appeared on the table as if by magic. I shouldn't have been surprised. It wasn't my first dinner there. But there I was, going on autopilot and thinking, we had just had dinner. Why were we having another one straight after? Even though I was convinced that putting the tiniest bit of food in my mouth would cause a complete gastric disaster, I didn't want to be impolite and leave the beautiful pink piece of fish untouched on my plate. So I tried a small bite, and then again, I couldn't believe it. The salmon almost melted in my mouth, juicy, delicate, with a gentle taste of butter and black pepper. I slowly finished the whole piece, discovering that my stomach seemed to be made of surprisingly stretchy rubber. I noticed Rosaria's glancing at me with a quiet smile of satisfaction, while my face clearly said, "This is absolutely amazing." By then, I did remember that there was still more to come. A green salad with a simple but delicious vinaigrette, a cheese board to close the stomach, whatever that meant, tiramisu, espresso, and grappa. The dinner seemed to go forever, and I was seriously beginning to wonder if it would ever end. Eating late and for hours was completely new to me. I wasn't sure if I was more excited about discovering all those new dishes or worried about not being able to sleep afterwards. Thankfully, as always, the digestive did its magic. And being 22 years old probably helped as well. Over the years, I had the pleasure of attending many more Italian feasts, both at my in law's house and later in Italy, and slowly learning more about the culture of eating. For example, that dessert and cheese board are not always mandatory, but the three-course structure is almost sacred whenever Italians sit down for a proper meal. 30 years later, I'm still a little worried about sleeping badly whenever I follow the Southern European eating habits, something that can easily happen when you live in Spain. And, and yes, I still rely on a small shot of something to help things along. The full three-course dinner never really became part of my everyday life, neither during my marriage nor after the divorce. But whenever I find myself at a real Italian feast, I'm still very happy to let my well trained stomach stretch a little further. Because Italian dinners were never really about the food alone, they were about stretching time.